Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk about the best recordings of Richard Strauss's immortal, inimitable tone poem, Till Eulenspiegel's Lustige Streiche, which is Till Eulenspiegel's Merry Pranks. Now, this is a complete bear to play. I mean, of all the tone poems, although it's the shortest by some measure, it may be the hardest in many respects, certainly rhythmically. The whole thing is written in this sort of syncopated 6/8 where nothing happens on the beat, and it's a real trial for any orchestra that attempts it. Even today, it's very, very difficult. And I've played it a couple times in the percussion section, which really sucks because Strauss was, his al fresco method of scoring, as he called it, was not always kind to the percussion section. And I just have to tell you a couple sort of insider stories. First of all, at the very, very end, in the epilogue, after Till's merry trial and happy hanging, that's German humor, by the way, all the merry pranks wind up with his merry execution. Ha ha, right? Okay. So there's a single tap on the triangle. And here it is. I'm going to show you the score. See where my finger is? Right there is the triangle tap. Now, the thing about this triangle tap is that after the happy hanging, as you can see here, where my finger is, the orchestra comes to rest on a fermata, which of course is a hold. And then up here, as you can see the passage that matters that I'm talking about, there is a empty bar, and as the epilogue begins with the opening, da da ba da da da, you know how it goes, right? But that's actually an upbeat. It's one, right? Now, what I see as the illustrious triangle player sitting there like this with my triangle is, in my part, a little empty bar with a rest over it that says 12, which means I'm supposed to count 12 measures of rest and then a half a measure and then go tap. No problem, right? Wrong, because it all depends on what the conductor does. What I don't see is that there's a fermata, a hold, preceding the epilogue, and that the first bar of the epilogue is an empty bar, except for the upbeat going into the next bar. So when the conductor was on 2 of the 12, I was always on 1 of the 12, which meant that I was always late. I was always a bar late. It was making us crazy. The conductor could not figure out why I couldn't get this thing right. And I was very frustrated because I was just counting, because I was waiting for a downbeat to begin counting. What she did was hold the fermata and then give a downbeat, which I counted as 1, but what was really, it was 2. It was the second bar. Happily, I had my score, and she, of course, had her conductor score. And at the interval, we got together, and I looked at her, and I said, "What are you doing?" And I could see how she was conducting it, and I saw, aha! So we resolved it, and that was somewhat of a crisis averted. It's a very important little triangle tap. Second issue is the ratchet. Now, as you know, Till Eulenspiegel causes all kinds of mayhem. And at the very beginning, with the first big cymbal crash, he runs through the marketplace, upsetting the apple carts and all that stuff. And Strauss writes for a ratchet, which is a cog rattle that you crank up and that does this. That's a ratchet. But this is, my friends, your normal everyday ratchet, like the kind used in Respighi's Pines of Rome for the children happily playing. No, that's not good enough for Mr. Strauss. He's German. He likes to do things on a grand Wagnerian scale. He wanted a grosse ratchet, as they say in Germany, a big ratchet. So here we go. Here it is. This is the Till Eulenspiegel ratchet. And listen to this sucker. the only way you do it, and I can't do it in here without causing, my ear is ringing now. You have no idea how loud that is. What you do is you hold it over your head and you whirl it around like a propeller, and you hope it stops when it's supposed to stop. It's really, these are custom built. They're really miracles of modern engineering, and they make one hell of a noise. It's really quite something, and that's what Strauss intended. So don't let yourself be fooled into accepting a regular ratchet when you should hear a giant contrabass mega ratchet. So there you go. Now you can talk about Till Eulenspiegel like a true insider. Some other details too, but those are the two that I was most concerned about in my peregrinations through the world of Mr. Eulenspiegel. There's also there's a real question about how descriptive the whole thing is, because Strauss, of course, doesn't tell you what all the merry pranks are. I mean, there was a program that was written and distributed, and, at one point he goes up into like the tower of the town hall and pees on everybody. That's a solo violin. When you hear the solo violin going, that's him peeing on everybody. I don't think it actually sounds very much like that, but you can judge for yourself. Your pee may sound different from my pee, and anyway. So let's talk about recordings. I can't even pretend to cover the number of recordings that are out there, like Beethoven's Fifth. I mean, in tone poem land, there are like millions of recordings. I mean, Karajan alone did it at least 4 times, maybe 5. It's insane how many there are. So there's no point in going through all of them. I'm going to talk about some classic versions and some modern versions that I particularly enjoy. I think I have 9 or 10 of them here. And that really is more than enough, I would think. It's not a piece, to be honest with you, that gives you a lot of latitude for interpretation. There's nothing really to interpret. You just want to play it as closely as possible to the way Strauss wrote it and keep it moving, like with everything by Strauss, because Strauss was one of those composers who has wonderful moments and interminable half hours. He had a really iffy sense of timing musically. We talked about that, I think, maybe a little bit with the Alpine Symphony. Everything ends quietly. Everything has these epilogues that drag on forever. In his operas, the singing doesn't really start till the plot's over. So here's a piece which is actually very compact. It only lasts about 15, 16 minutes, and the best performances take even a little bit less than that, somewhere in the 14, 15-minute range. Not, again, because the timing is all important. The inflection, the character, those are the things that are important. And if the soloists of the orchestra really put a lot of juice into their parts, it can be absolutely wonderful. But it really depends on the caliber of the orchestra and the ability of the conductor to just get on with it and not think that we're going to understand what all the joking is about, because we're not. We only get a sense of general merriment, chaos, and, strange things, bumping and thumping. The trial at the end, of course, his, merry trial and happy hanging. Obvious what that is, right? I mean, it's wonderful with him screeching at the top and the high clarinet, and the judge is going bam, bam, boom. That all that stuff is very, very graphic. But in between the beginning and we get to the trial, all kinds of stuff happens, and you want to keep that stuff bubbling along in a general atmosphere of fun and merriment. So Stokowski always did fun and merriment wonderfully, and this is his Everest recording with the Stadium Symphony of New York, which is really the New York Philharmonic, and this is just tremendous fun. And again, it just moves. It's exciting and it's peppy and it has all kinds of character. You just get this sense of things happening programmatically. And what I really like about this particular disc, it's got Don Juan, the Dance of the Seven Veils, is that the filler is with the Houston Symphony, the Thomas Canning Fantasy on a Hymn Tune by Justin Morgan, which is sort of like the Vaughan Williams Tallis Fantasia played sideways. It's this American piece that's just a shameless plagiarism, basically, of Vaughan Williams, at least conceptually, and it's a wonderful piece to hear. So, I mean, if you can find this Everest disc, definitely worth a shot. Now we have to talk about like classic Strauss conductors, and we have a bunch of them here, and you'll be quite familiar with them. Reiner. Reiner was not known for his sense of humor. Look at the picture here. Does that look like a guy who was like going to be merry ever? Well, there you go. And he did Till Eulenspiegel twice. but not, interestingly, in Chicago, where he really should have, because he had the orchestra. He did it in Vienna, and it's okay. And he did an earlier one with, I think it's the MPC Symphony or one of those, or the RCA Victor Symphony Orchestra. That's what it is. And they're typical Reiner. They're clean, they're crisp, they're well done. But do they have a sense of humor, a real sense of humor that you could hear that comes through the notes? I don't think so, not particularly. However, Karajan, another laugh riot of a conductor, he recorded this thing 4 or 5 times, as I said. This is probably the best, his sort of middle one. He did them for EMI, he did them for Deutsche Grammophon 3 or 4 times, or 2 or 3 times. I don't know, I lost count. It doesn't matter. He did one on Decca with the Vienna Phil. But this one with the Berlin is his best. I mean, of course, this one isn't even on here. Thank you. I've done it my best, isn't it? But he did do it. It's on here somewhere in this series. I guess that's just a sample of it. I have it sitting over on the shelf here. But, Karajan was a great, great, great Strauss conductor because, although he wasn't the zippiest, he was a color and texture guy. That's what he loved. And he loved what Strauss loved, which is strings and harps and horns. And so, when he does Strauss, it's always, pretty magnificent. And so you can count on Karajan as an extremely reliable guide to Till Eulenspiegel, even if, again, he isn't as humorous and light and entertaining as the music can be. But then again, he's going to get tried and hung at the end, so maybe it's not supposed to be all that entertaining. Next, this box of another, Strauss is now in boxes, lots of them, has Szell in Cleveland. Now that's a great Till Eulenspiegel, and it has the requisite humor, because Szell could do it. I've said before, when he wanted to be, he could have humor, especially ironic humor, and I think some crude humor, which is what Strauss was good at too. Now, Szell knew Strauss and respected him enormously, and Strauss respected Szell enormously. And his Strauss recordings, Szell's Strauss recordings, are all superlative. And so is this Till Eulenspiegel. It is, as you might imagine, from a technical point of view, practically unbelievable. I mean, it's never been played better. And it's also swift and unsentimental and crisp and just absolutely terrific. Fantastic. Another very, very fine Till Eulenspiegel is this set. This is Bernard Haitink doing famous Strauss tone poems. It has what was always one of the classic Ein Heldenlebens. Here we have the Concertgebouw at its absolute top, peak, beautiful, wonderful woodwinds, loads of personality. Haitink doesn't have so much personality, but the orchestra does, and that's what really matters. And he's a true collaborator with them. He gets them to play and lets them play, and it's an absolutely beautiful Till. Next, Solti. Now, Solti's Strauss could be on again, off again, but he spent an awful lot of time with it. And this, again, it's a powerhouse performance by a powerhouse orchestra, Chicago. And, it's the one that we probably wish Reiner sort of would have done, but never did. And it's an excellently played, excellently recorded, very, very high voltage performance of Till Eulenspiegel. Again, humor? I mean, what is humor? How do we hear humor? We'll talk about that in a minute. But I can't fault the performance or the interpretation. I mean, it's a very, very, very exciting performance. However, if you really want to start to get into the humorous underbelly of the music, then there are a couple of performances I think we could talk about that may bring that out in a way that you can hear more clearly. Blomstedt and San Francisco. This series is sort of mostly in a big Decca box, but not all of it. Unfortunately, in the big Decca box, the Eulenspiegel was replaced with Court Mazurs, which was not a good idea. It's not a bad performance, of course, but compared to this, forget it. Blomstedt did these pieces with also the Staatskapelle Dresden for Denon. He is a major Straussian, a very unsung Straussian, but like everything he does, he brings a naturalness and a flow to the music making that's really quite wonderful. And this Strauss series on Decca is just first rate. His Till Eulenspiegel is as carefree and breezy as you could want. And he lets the orchestra characterize, and they do it very, very well. It's a wonderfully poetic. Yes, it can be poetic, but also it has a lightness and a buoyancy that gives you, I think, that sense of humor that the music tries to capture, and that Strauss did capture, because he was a funny guy by all accounts. He spent most of his career, remember, the latter half of his career, the part that was a failure, writing comic operas. He wanted to do comedy. He had the great misfortune of being German, and that was a big problem, and a post-Wagnerian German. That was an even bigger problem. But there was one guy, and you know who it is. You know what's coming. Yeah, Kempe. Good old Kempe. Kempe was, as a conductor, probably the greatest colorist of the entire second half of the 20th century. I mean, nobody was able to get into the texture and sound of the orchestra, maybe because he was an oboist by trade, or something like that. But he understood one really critical fact, that orchestral color depends on the woodwind section. More than anything else, it depends on the character of the winds, and you have to let the woodwinds strut their stuff, nowhere more than in Till Eulenspiegel. So his Staatskapelle Dresden recordings, which are these, have been the classic Strauss tone poem recordings since the day they were issued, and they are absolutely magnificent, not uniformly so. I mean, I think that, in some pieces, like perhaps Heldenleben and some others, he could have been a little bit more trenchant, shall we say, maybe a little bit more heavy duty, or at least some other performances are, like Reiner, for example, in Chicago. But when it comes to Richard Strauss, the caricaturist, nobody is more pointed and witty and buoyant and effervescent than Kempe. And this disc, which is with the Berlin Philharmonic, it's also in stereo, it's on Testament, has Till Eulenspiegel too, and also maybe the greatest ever Don Quixote. This is also worth having. I really can't choose between them, because the playing is extraordinary on both, and Kempe is Kempe on both. To realize, I think, the real meaning of Strauss's Till Eulenspiegel, its humor, its wit, its merriment, then you just have to hear Kempe, one way or another. But any of these versions, and this is a lot of them, will serve you very well. And, some of them even have the grosse ratchet. Oh my gosh, that really is unbelievable. You can't imagine. Anyway, that is the best way to encounter Till Eulenspiegel, thanks to Rudolf Kempe. So keep on listening, folks, even for the grosse ratchet. And thank you.